In this podcast episode, Bryce Crawford shares his life story, faith journey, and experiences as a Gen Z street preacher, engaging with some of the darkest subcultures and environments in America. The conversation explores his struggles with mental health, his dramatic conversion to Christianity, his ministry calling, and the challenges he faces while evangelizing in hostile settings like the Satanic Temple, Burning Man, and Furry conventions. They also address profound theological topics, including the nature of faith, salvation, the prosperity gospel, differences between Christianity and Islam, biblical understandings of the end times, and how young people today are spiritually navigating a confusing and often hostile world. Bryce grew up in a small town in Georgia, surrounded by church culture, yet deeply disillusioned by hypocrisy and personal loss. His grandfather's death at a young age triggered a severe and prolonged battle with depression and anxiety, deepened by a long-standing pornography addiction that began in childhood. Bryce's mental health deteriorated to the point of contemplating suicide, and one Christmas Day in 2020, after a difficult family event, he planned to take his life. A chance encounter at a Waffle House, however, became a turning point when he felt overwhelmed by God's presence and love, leading to his surrender to Jesus Christ. Since that moment, Bryce has been committed to living out his faith authentically, seeking accountability, changing his environment, and dedicating himself to spreading the gospel. Bryce discusses the burdens and pressures of ministry, especially as a young Christian in a culture often hostile toward faith. He acknowledges the tension of balancing ministry responsibilities with family life, emphasizing the Bible's teaching that caring for one's family is paramount. Bryce also reveals the emotional toll of calling out evil and confronting dark and dangerous realities, noting that ministry can feel more like a duty or burden than a joyful task at times. Honesty and humility about these struggles are essential in his leadership, and he stresses the importance of surrounding oneself with trusted mentors and friends who hold one accountable. Bryce emphasizes the approach to evangelism through respect, love, and genuine conversation rather than condemnation or shouting. His ministry involves engaging one-on-one with people in public places, addressing all kinds of individuals, from everyday passersby to groups like Satanists, the KKK, and furries. He challenges the stereotype of street preachers as aggressive hecklers by focusing on relational dialogue, asking questions such as, "What do you think about Jesus?" Or, "If God could perform a miracle in your life today, what would it be?" This approach often leads to meaningful conversations and even conversions, as seen in several campus events and public encounters. Bryce advocates planting seeds and trusting God to bring growth rather than relying solely on persuasive speech. Bryce recounts visiting the Satanic Temple in Salem, Massachusetts, describing it as a dark, heavy place full of demonic imagery and political activism rather than blasphemous rituals. He felt a genuine spiritual weight upon entering, praying for conviction for those who visit. His encounter with Burning Man portrayed an even darker reality, a massive, week-long festival centered around hedonism, drugs, and sexual immorality, more an orgy disguised as an art festival than a typical gathering. Similarly, furry conventions also surprised him with their mixture of adult participants embracing animal personas, often with a heavy sexualized subculture beneath the surface. Bryce's willingness to engage these marginalized and misunderstood groups stems from his belief that no one is beyond reach and that bold gospel witness is needed, especially in places society dismisses. Bryce and the host discuss doubts, faith struggles, and the importance of daily spiritual discipline. Bryce shares that he starts his day reading the Bible and a devotional, relying on God's peace to navigate intense ministry work and personal challenges. They also touch on the toxic nature of social media and how stepping away from it has renewed creativity and presence in their lives. Both agree that humility, accountability, and consistent reflection on one's purpose are vital to maintaining spiritual health. Imposter syndrome and insecurity are part of their experience, but pressing forward despite fear is essential. The conversation critiques the prosperity gospel, which asserts that God guarantees health, wealth, and success to believers if they pray hard enough. Bryce rejects this message, instead presenting biblical success as being a faithful follower of Jesus who loves God and others, even amid suffering. He references figures like Paul, who embraced hardships rather than worldly riches. Success, Bryce explains, is stewardship of God-given gifts with humility, prioritizing family and spiritual integrity over fame or fortune. The ministry's vision is to make decisions for the glory of God rather than personal elevation, balancing ambition with rest and spiritual health. Bryce identifies as a Protestant, but shows respect and appreciation for the historic traditions of Catholicism, especially in its reverence for church history, sacraments, and theological richness. He laments the divisions within the broader Christian church that stem from secondary doctrinal issues and encourages unity centered on the gospel. He stresses that authentic faith must be visible through transformed lives, not just ritual or profession. The church today must cultivate biblical masculinity, with men called to be bold, sacrificial leaders modeled after Christ's love for the church. Bryce openly shares his strong views about Islam, calling it the Antichrist from his perspective, while loving Muslim individuals personally. He portrays Islam as a religion founded on acts of violence, intolerance, and false teachings that conflict with biblical Christianity. He critiques the Quran and Hadith, particularly highlighting the disturbing example of Muhammad marrying Aisha when she was 6 and consummating the marriage at 9. Bryce outlines what he terms the Islamic dilemma. Islam calls Muslims to confirm the Quran's truth by referring to the Bible, but at the same time claims the Bible is corrupt, creating a logical inconsistency. He points out the similarities between Islamic eschatology and Christian end-times prophecy, but notes that these parallels suggest deception. Bryce's research into Islam was driven by observing geopolitical realities and the faith's rapid global growth, as well as confrontations with Muslim apologists on college campuses. The discussion covers biblical teachings about the end times with caution against date-setting and sensationalism. Bryce explains the parable of the 10 virgins, emphasizing the importance of readiness and purity in awaiting Christ's return. The return of Jesus is framed as a joyous wedding feast imagery, with Christ preparing a place for his bride, the church. They stress that while wars, natural disasters, and moral decline have always occurred cyclically, these signs create urgency to share the gospel rather than fear. The nature of heaven and hell is explored with the emphasis that separation from God, rather than physical torment alone, explains eternal suffering. Heaven is portrayed as eternal communion with God and transformation, not just endless singing. Bryce discusses the growth of their ministry, which has grown exponentially through social media, reaching billions of views worldwide through public outreach and videos. The team regularly receives requests to speak or debate in college campuses, and plans to train young believers globally to engage respectfully with those of different faiths. They believe Gen Z is increasingly seeking authentic faith amid cultural confusion and spiritual thirst. Bryce emphasizes that true boldness in sharing the gospel comes from listening, loving, and human connection more than mere argumentation. The vision is for a movement beyond events, empowering local campus ministries to carry forward. Bryce shares his love story with his wife Maddie, who came into his ministry life unexpectedly and became a partner in faith, marriage, and mission. They dated for 2 years before marrying and living in Los Angeles, navigating the challenges of ministry alongside family and personal growth. Their relationship models biblical partnership and sacrificial love, grounded in spiritual commitment amid cultural complexity. Throughout the interview, both Bryce and the host wrestle with the tension of staying authentic in a world of competing ideologies, rampant sin, and misinformation. They reflect on their personal vulnerabilities, fears, and the challenge of discerning cultural noise from spiritual truth. The need for wisdom, humility, community, and persistent faith is underscored as essential for navigating modern Christian life and ministry. The podcast closes with prayers for guidance, strength, and impact.